Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling some truly foundational anatomy. We're going to dive into the pleura, the lungs, the trachea, basically the entire architecture of breathing, and try to build, a clear mental picture of how it all works.
It's a great topic because it's all about mechanics. We often just say the lungs exchange gas, but we're going to get into the how the thorax and the diaphragm create this incredible engine that, keeps us all going.
Right, and the sources dive right in by challenging sort of the first thing everyone thinks about with breathing. We all think oxygen, 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 but that's not the main job, is it?
It's really not on a minute-to-minute basis. Oxygen is obviously critical, but the single most important function for your brain and heart to work correctly is maintaining incredibly tight carbon dioxide homeostasis.
Homeostasis, so keeping it stable.
Exactly. We're talking about a partial pressure of CO2 that has to stay between, say, 38 and 42 millimeters of mercury. It's a razor-thin margin.
So why is CO2 the big deal, even more so than oxygen?
Because CO2 is an acid in the blood. The second it goes up, your blood pH drops, it becomes acidic, and that immediately messes with enzymes, with your heart's electrical rhythm, your brain function, everything. We can actually handle a fairly wide swing in oxygen, but we have almost no tolerance for CO2 changes.
That really reframes the whole system. So if that's the goal, how does the anatomy actually pull air into the body?
It all comes down to negative pressure. The diaphragm pulls down, the chest wall expands, and it creates a vacuum inside your chest, a suction. And air has no choice but to rush in. But what's just as important is the air that doesn't leave.
The air that's always left over after you breathe out.
Exactly. The residual volume. It's a huge buffer. If you emptied your lungs completely with every breath, the oxygen and CO2 levels would spike and crash constantly. It would be chaos. This residual volume smooths it all out so the gas exchange is continuous and stable.
Okay, so that's the stability.
Yeah.
But we're constantly pulling in dust, viruses, everything from the outside. So it has to be a security system.
A very elaborate one. You have 4 main lines of defense. There's the mucus itself. Then this incredible thing called the mucociliary escalator, tiny hairs constantly sweeping upwards.
Like a little conveyor belt for gunk.
A perfect analogy. Then the branching of the airways traps particles. And finally, you have the explosive cough reflex.
And if that little escalator breaks down, if the cilia stop working,
Then the whole system fails. That's what you see in something like Cartner's syndrome. The cilia are immotile. They just can't beat. And the result is, a disaster. Constant infections, mucus just sits there, and you get progressive lung damage. It shows you how critical those tiny moving parts are.
okay, let's get into the space where this all happens.
Yeah.
The pleura. It's not just one bag, is it?
No, it's a double-layered membrane. You have the visceral pleura, which is basically shrink-wrapped directly onto the lung surface itself.
Okay.
It even dips down into all the cracks and fissures.
And the other layer.
That's the parietal pleura, and it lines the inside of your chest wall.
So that space between them, the pleural cavity.
It's what we call a potential space. It's not really an open gap. It just has a tiny bit of lubricating fluid, and the surface tension basically glues those 2 layers together. Think of 2 wet panes of glass.
Oh, right. You can slide them around easily, but it's really hard to pull them apart.
That's the mechanism exactly, and that's where the negative pressure comes from. You have the chest wall constantly trying to spring outwards and the elastic lung tissue constantly trying to recoil inwards. They're pulling against each other.
And if you break that seal, if air gets in between the panes of glass,
You get a pneumothorax, a collapsed lung. But the really terrifying version is a tension pneumothorax.
what makes it a tension pneumothorax?
That's where the tear in the pleura acts like a one-way valve. Air gets sucked in when you inhale, but the flap closes so it can't get out when you exhale.
Oh, wow. So the pressure just builds and builds.
And builds and builds. It shoves your heart and your great vessels over to the other side of your chest. It is a true medical emergency.
How quickly do you have to act?
Minutes. You have to decompress it immediately. The classic landmark every medical student learns is to stick a large needle into the second intercostal space in the midclavicular line. You have to know that spot. You hear a hiss of air, and you've just saved a life.
Incredible. Okay, so let's map out that outer layer, the parietal pleura. It's not just one uniform sheet.
No, we divide it into 4 parts based on what it's touching. You have the costal part on the ribs, the diaphragmatic part on the diaphragm, the mediastinal part in the middle, and then the really interesting one, the cervical part, the dome.
The dome that actually pokes up into the neck.
Mhm.
That sounds vulnerable.
It is a little bit. It extends about 3 or 4 centimeters above your first rib. It's protected by this tough fibrous cap called the suprapleural membrane, or Simpson's fascia.
And down below you have these little pockets, the recesses, where the lung doesn't quite fill the whole space.
Right, like the diaphragmatic recess. It's an empty space at the bottom that the lungs only expand into when you take a really deep breath. It's just extra room to grow.
Now, this mapping is critical for pain, right? The innervation tells you where a patient is going to feel something.
It's a perfect diagnostic tool. If you have irritation on the pleura lining your ribs or the outer edges of your diaphragm, that's the intercostal nerves. You feel the pain right there, locally.
But the middle is different.
The middle part, the mediastinal pleura, and the central part of the diaphragm, that's all supplied by the phrenic nerve.
Which comes from the neck.
Yeah.
C3, C4.
Exactly. So if you have, say, a bit of fluid irritating the center of your diaphragm, you don't feel it in your chest. You feel pain in your shoulder tip or the side of your neck. It's classic referred pain.
Wild. Let's shift to the lungs themselves. We know they're not symmetrical.
Not at all. They're shaped by everything around them. The right lung is a bit shorter and wider because the liver sits right underneath it, pushing it up. The left lung is longer and narrower to make room for the heart.
So let's use that. If you were holding a lung in your hand, what are the dead giveaways to tell if it's the left or the right?
The left lung is all about the heart. You'll see this massive deep dent in it, the cardiac impression. And then arching over the top, there's this huge groove. You can almost trace it with your finger. That's for the aortic arch.
And the right lung wouldn't have that giant aortic groove.
No, its cardiac impression is much shallower. The big landmark on the right lung is a groove arching over the hilum for the azygos vein. And behind that, a shallow little channel where the esophagus sits.
Now for the internal divisions.
Yeah.
The lobes. The left lung is the simpler one.
Right, just two lobes, superior and inferior, divided by the oblique fissure. But the key features on the left are the cardiac notch, this big cutout for the heart, and just below it, a little tongue-like bit called the lingula.
And the right lung is the classic three lobes.
Superior, middle, and inferior, separated by the oblique and horizontal fissures. But here's a huge clinical point. Those fissures are often incomplete. The sources say the left oblique fissure can be incomplete in something like 73% of people.
Why is an incomplete fissure such a big deal for a surgeon?
Well, if you're doing a lobectomy, removing one lobe, you expect a clean plane to separate the lobes. If that fissure isn't complete, the lobes are fused together. When you try to separate them, you cause massive air leaks from the next lobe over. It's a huge complication. Anatomy in the textbook is not always what you find in a person.
A great reminder. Okay, let's follow the air down the pipes, starting with the trachea.
It's a pretty simple tube, about 10 or 11 centimeters long in an adult. It runs down and splits at a point called the carina, usually around T5 or T6, and its structure is maintained by these C-shaped cartilage rings.
C-shaped, so they're not complete circles.
No, the back is open. It's a flat, muscular wall that faces the esophagus. That's the trachealis muscle. It lets the esophagus expand a bit when you swallow, and it contracts forcefully during a cough.
And that split of the carina leads to the main bronchi. This is the anatomical feature that explains, well, why swallowed Legos always go to the same place.
Obvious.
No, it really is a design flaw, you could say.
Yeah.
The right main bronchus is shorter, it's wider, and it's much, much more vertical. It's almost a straight shot from the trachea down into the right lung.
So anything you aspirate is going to follow the path of least resistance.
Overwhelmingly. And we describe its position relative to the artery as epiarterial. That means its first branch comes off above the pulmonary artery.
So epi for above, and the left.
The left main bronchus is longer, narrower, and takes a much sharper, more horizontal turn. It's much harder for something to get down there. And it is hyperarterial, meaning it passes under the left pulmonary artery. The heart basically shoves it out of the way into a safer position.
And these bronchi keep dividing down into the key surgical units.
That's the bronchopulmonary segments, usually 10 on each side, S1 to S10. They're like little self-contained pyramids of lung tissue, each with its own air and blood supply. It means a surgeon can take out just one diseased segment without having to remove a whole lobe.
As we go deeper, down into the tiny airways, what changes? When do we lose the cartilage? The cartilage plates disappear when the airways get smaller than about 1 millimeter in diameter. At that point, they're called bronchioles. And the cell lining changes, too. You start to see these specialized Pleura cells.
What do the Pleura cells do?
They're protective. They can help detoxify harmful substances, and they also produce a type of surfactant, a lipoprotein that helps keep these tiny airways from collapsing.
Speaking of keeping things working, the lung has this really unusual dual blood supply.
It's a fantastic system. First, you have the pulmonary circulation. This is the low-pressure, high-volume workhorse system, bringing deoxygenated blood to be refilled. The arteries follow the bronchi perfectly, but, and this is key, the veins run independently in the walls between the segments.
And the second system, the one for the lungs' own health.
That's the bronchial circulation. It's part of the high-pressure systemic circuit, coming right off the aorta. It brings fresh, oxygenated blood to the airway walls and the lung tissue itself to keep them alive.
What happens when things go wrong with that pulmonary circulation?
Well, the classic emergency is a pulmonary embolism. A clot gets stuck in a pulmonary artery. So you have air coming into a part of the lung, but no blood flow to pick up the oxygen. It's what we call a ventilation-perfusion mismatch. It can be fatal.
Oh, finally, we get to the business end of the system, the alveoli, this massive surface area for gas exchange.
About 70 to 100 square meters. It's huge.
Okay.
And the barrier between the air and the blood is incredibly thin, made up of two key cell types. Over 90% of the surface is covered by very thin, flat type I pneumocytes. They're built for diffusion.
But they're delicate.
Very. They can't divide or repair themselves. That job falls to the type 2 pneumocytes. They're more numerous, they're cuboidal, and their main job is to produce and secrete pulmonary surfactant.
Which brings us back to surface tension. Why is surfactant so vital?
The alveoli are tiny, wet sacs. The surface tension of water is incredibly strong, and it would just cause them to collapse flat on every exhalation. Surfactant is like a detergent. It breaks that surface tension and allows the alveoli to stay open. It's why premature babies struggle to breathe. They haven't started making enough surfactant yet.
And even at this microscopic level, there are backups built in.
Yes, the interalveolar pores of cone. They're little holes that connect neighboring alveoli. They allow for collateral ventilation. So if one small airway gets blocked, air can still sneak in from the side to keep that section of the lung working.
Amazing. We started with defenses. Let's end with the most powerful one. The cough reflex. It's more than just a quick burst of air.
Oh, it's a three-phase explosion. First, a huge deep breath in. Second, the compression phase. The glottis slams shut and you build up immense pressure in your chest, up to 300 millimeters of mercury.
And the third phase is the release.
A violent release. The glottis flies open and the air is expelled at speeds approaching 500 miles per hour. It's a physical blast designed to dislodge whatever is in there.
That's incredible. And what's the trigger for all this?
Specialized nerve endings from the vagus nerve. You have different types. Rapidly adapting receptors for mechanical changes, C fibers for chemical irritants. They all feed into a cough center in the brainstem.
Which leads us to one last, very bizarre clinical correlation, the ear cough reflex.
It's a real thing, the otorespiratory reflex. A patient has a chronic cough, you can't find anything wrong with their lungs, and it turns out to be a piece of earwax or even a hair touching their eardrum. It's irritating the auricular branch of the vagus nerve, Arnold's nerve, and that signal gets misinterpreted by the brain as a lung irritant.
That is just a perfect example of how interconnected everything is.
Yeah.
So we've covered the negative pressure in the pleura, the critical landmark for decompression, the huge difference between the right and left bronchi.
And if I could leave you with one final thought, let's go back to the pulmonary circulation. Remember how I said the veins run between the bronchopulmonary segments?
Right, they drain adjacent segments, not just their own.
Exactly. This means those surgical segments are not truly isolated vascular units.
Yeah.
They share their venous drainage. It's a beautiful piece of design. It builds in redundancy, ensuring that the system is robust and that blood can always find a way back to the heart, even if one small area is compromised.
A truly amazing system. Well, thank you for walking us through all of that. It's been a fantastic deep dive into the very mechanics of life.
My pleasure. It was fun.
And thanks to all of you for listening. We'll catch you next time for more essential knowledge.